Welcome everyone to Bitcoin Magazine's Meet The Plebs. I am your host, Casey Carillo, and before we begin today, I have some goodies for y'all, some codes. If you've heard of the conference going on in Miami, April 6th to the 9th, called Bitcoin 2022, we are responsible for that, and it's going to be awesome. Bitcoin 2021 was the most insane event in the entire industry ever. And this is only going to be bigger. So make sure you go. The code is Taco Plebs, no space, Taco Plebs. That's 10% off. And if you buy with Bitcoin, you get $100 off the GA pass, I believe. So make sure to do that. And for those of you interested in the deep dive technical analysis product, I have a code for you as well, Macro21. And without further ado, we have a fantastic guest today, Grant McCarty, Director of Public Policy and Affairs here at Bitcoin Magazine. Welcome.
How's it going, Casey? Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, so have I. And you really lead an interesting part of this company. You really would have an impact on the world around us. And it's going to be great to really talk to you about like what you're doing here and how you've gotten into Bitcoin. So without further ado, how did you get into Bitcoin and what were you introduced to Bitcoin by?
Yeah, this is funny because I've gotten asked this before. And at first, if I was talking to like non-Bitcoiners, I wouldn't really tell them the truth. I'd be like, oh, I found out about Bitcoin on the internet and thought it was cool, which is half the truth. In all reality, I was like a dumb high schooler who wanted to get like HBO Go, but didn't have the $15 a month to, get HBO Go. So, of course, this is like 2014, I'm venturing, found out about Tor, found out about the dark web. And I was like, I can get an HBO account for like $10 in Bitcoin, right? Like this person's selling it. Of course, not thinking, about the reality, which is somebody else's HBO account that I was probably stealing. I buy my $10 worth of Bitcoin, I send it, and I got scammed, right? That's the reality of it. I just, never got that HBO account, lost my $10 in Bitcoin, and it hit me. I was like, I don't know where that money went. I don't know who has that money. And I was hooked. Seriously, it's a weird origin story. I think, but I'm sure a lot of people got their start pretty similarly. But from then, 2014, I was that high schooler who was like, hey, mom and dad, you heard of this Bitcoin thing, around the table, that kind of deal. Unfortunately, people didn't take me as seriously around then. And 2017 is when I got serious about investing in it. And that was, a better time to start talking to people about it. Ended up getting a buddy of mine to start mining at that time, which was pretty cool. And then started working in the space pretty recently in the past few months.
Yeah, that is a common story. I feel like, it's the sort of underground world of the internet leading people to Bitcoin, especially in those early days. And it's interesting that getting scammed is what led you to go like, how did this money work? Because it is quite mysterious when you first use it and you're like, wait, how did this all go away all of a sudden,
Yeah, it was fascinating. It really got me thinking about money in general. And I think for a lot of Bitcoiners, there are probably a lot of synergies between, you start thinking about what's this magical internet money, but then you also start thinking about like, okay, what is money in the first place? You start thinking about how do markets work, right? Is this all is it all made up, right? Is it all meaningless? Is it all nonsense? And these are just the questions that are running around in your mind. And so, Bitcoiners, we talk about the rabbit hole all the time, right? And so that was kind of my introduction to falling down that rabbit hole of, I guess it took, getting scammed or being on that dark side of the internet to get introduced to that. But what's been amazing is, the progression over the past 7 years, seeing it translate from the dark side of the internet, dark side of the world of finance, et cetera. And I mean, actually, I would argue now, Bitcoin, there are a few things that are more mainstream than Bitcoin in the world today.
Truly. It's definitely becoming, an incredibly common thing. And you're definitely right about Bitcoin having a rabbit hole that can lead to you questioning so many things. I guess to bounce off of that, I'd ask you, what are some of the interesting life lessons you've sort of extracted from your time in Bitcoin?
That's a great question. Yeah, it's I could probably go on 20 different tangents here. Probably the one that sticks out the most, and this is likely because I'm doing work in the policy side of things, and working with people on the left, working with people on the right, working with people on the center, people who don't identify with any of that, who there's not even a spectrum to talk about what they are, right? Mm-hmm. And I think Bitcoin has been fascinating for me because despite what we've seen, as a country, I think whether you're 20 or you're 60, I think the past 5 or 6 years in politics have been pretty, I don't know, I hate using the word unprecedented. I don't fully think it's unprecedented, but, they've been pretty wild, to say the least, right? And I think, you see a lot of, partisan divide. You see that it's really hard to find common ground. And I think what Bitcoin has shown me is like, there's still common ground. Bitcoin is something that no matter who you are, no matter what you look like, no matter where you come from, you can find something or many things about Bitcoin that relate to you personally, that matter to you. And that has been actually really, really incredible in terms of kind of moving away from this disillusionment that I know a lot of people feel about our current system, whether that's political, financial, or otherwise, and actually finding hope in, hey, maybe it's not all bad.
Right. Yeah. Bitcoin is really a source of optimism. I did a previous interview that we talked about that. And it's for everyone. And as you mentioned, you work, with people from both political spectrums, as our public policy, manager here at the magazine. I am really interested in what you consider to be the biggest political challenges facing Bitcoin at this moment.
That's a great question. I think just to preface this, one of the biggest pieces of feedback that I get from Bitcoiners, and rightfully so, is this idea that, excuse me, Bitcoin isn't political. Bitcoin doesn't need to be in politics. We don't need to get involved in politics, right? And that's valid. And I'll address that, I'm sure, more, throughout this interview. But I think there are serious political challenges that we face, specifically in the US, right? Because that's where the kind of realm of my policy work is. So I'm not going to, necessarily talk about political systems in other countries, although we might get to that a little bit. But I would say one of the biggest challenges that we face in the US is partisan divide. Right. We risk right now Bitcoin falling into partisanship. Right now, Bitcoin publicly, from a political perspective, tends to lean right in terms of more conservatives have come out and publicly adopted a pro-Bitcoin policy stance. Mm-hmm. I believe there are some Republicans who have been outspoken about trying to make Bitcoin and crypto a Republican issue or conservative issue. I think that's one. I think it's a strategic maybe mistake on their end. I see why politicians would want to do that. I see why policymakers would want to do that strategically, but I think it's bad for Bitcoin. And I worry that if we continue kind of falling down this path, or we don't try to correct it, soon enough, you risk certain things like the energy arguments, and you risk something like that taking people on the left who would otherwise love Bitcoin and not getting them on your side at all. You risk things like the illicit finance fund, keeping people from getting on your side, right? And so I think partisanship is something we face right now. I don't want this to be an issue where Bitcoin is for the left, Bitcoin's for the right. Bitcoin is for everyone. And the sooner everybody gets on board with that, the sooner we can actually make substantial, policy change in the United States and position the United States to be a leader in Bitcoin rather than a country who's trying to fight it, or a country who is at odds with one party who loves Bitcoin and one party who doesn't understand it or doesn't want it. So I think for us as a country, I really think we should, try to reach across the aisle from that perspective, or even get rid of the aisle and stop talking about Bitcoin from this partisan perspective and just relate it to kind of a human perspective. Why does Bitcoin matter to you personally? have those conversations with people, regardless of their political affiliation, and I'm sure you'll find some common ground.
Right. We don't want Bitcoin to be a polarized topic. And I mean, to your point, that's why I love this show, because we do have people from all sorts of different backgrounds on this show, or I have talked to many people of different backgrounds, and everyone has a different perspective on why Bitcoin is important, why it's changing the world, and the benefits of Bitcoin. And it doesn't, partisanship is polarization, and we don't have to take that route of making it, a single-sided issue. If as Bitcoiners often say, if you believe in freedom, you believe in Bitcoin. And so I think everyone in the world can get behind freedom. And so I guess I would ask you, how do you think the Bitcoin community can best address these issues presented by regulation and public policy?
Yeah, this is a loaded question, and there's a lot that comes to mind. I probably won't get to hit on everything that I'm thinking of. So from the top, this actually might be a controversial opinion. So, buckle up, Bitcoiners, because I know Bitcoiners who just are going to hate me for saying this. But I do think in terms of addressing regulation and public policy, I think the first step is admitting that you have a problem, right? With any sort of issue, right? You have to admit that there's something that you would like to change about the situation, right? And so starting with the premise that I believe, and I think most Bitcoiners believe, Bitcoin is inevitable, right? We don't need the United States on our side or the United States government to love Bitcoin in order for Bitcoin to stick around and be successful in some way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean we don't want it, right? And so I guess what I would say is, how can the Bitcoin community best address these issues? Understand that it's okay to play the game, to play the political game, to once again, reach across the aisle, to have these conversations. I know that's controversial, so let me explain, right? Here's an example. We know that regulation in some way, shape, or form is making its way into the crypto industry, right? In Bitcoin more specifically, as proof of work is being targeted and things like that. What Bitcoiners have typically done, right, and what I personally don't think is the best strategy, but once again, I understand why people do it, is essentially they say, screw you, Washington. We don't need you. We're not going to play by your rules. We're not going to play your game at all. And you do what you will with Bitcoin. Like, we don't need you. And that is 100% true. Again, Bitcoin doesn't need Washington's support to survive. But my question is pretty simple, right? Like, wouldn't it be nice if we had it anyway, right? Especially if you're a Bitcoin maxi, if you are a Bitcoin only person, you believe in Bitcoin, hyper Bitcoinization, having the US supporting Bitcoin is a very clear path toward an earlier hyper Bitcoinized world, right? I think it's probably one of the highest EV plays in terms of creating a world that's hyper Bitcoinized. So from that perspective, avoiding this partisan divide, engaging with regulators, being involved in those conversations, showing them that this community is willing to engage. And you can believe all you want that Bitcoin is going to, how Bitcoin's going to interact with the fiat system. There are any number of areas that you could fall in that spectrum of where we're going to see Bitcoin, in the next 10, 50, 100, 500 years, right? But I think at the moment, when you look at who has the power, I don't think it's unreasonable to want to engage with those people and work with them on their terms if we're getting what we want out of it. And so I guess, another question is, like, wouldn't it be nice if we had political champions on both sides of the aisle from what is arguably the most powerful country in the world, right? Like in by many measures, right? If you don't think that would be good for Bitcoin, then I honestly, I just think you're lying to yourself, right? You cannot like that, and that's totally okay. That is valid. You can reject that. Sure. I would just encourage you to reconsider, right? And so going back to regulation and how the Bitcoin community can best address political issues, right? I'll mention a couple of things. First, the community can just generally stay informed of what's going on with Bitcoin in Washington, right? There are pretty consistently, there are hearings that come up where they ask for public comment. They ask for questions and submissions from the public, right? The Bitcoin community can be involved in things like that. In fact, we want the Bitcoin community to be actively involved with things like that, because right now, the people involved with Bitcoin conversation regulation in Washington are not always the people who are actually experts on this stuff. They're not always the people who actually know what they're talking about. And one of the worst things that you can have is, people who are creating policy and legislation without understanding the things that they're policing and regulating. So that leads to, just in general, get involved early and often, right? So I know, once again, a lot of people don't think Bitcoin and politics go together, and you're entitled to that opinion. But I'd like to, quick 30-second anecdote, just tell you about a trip that we had a few weeks ago in DC with some other Bitcoin advocates throughout the industry. We met with congressional staffers in the House and in the Senate, myself and a couple of people from Bitcoin Magazine and the policy team, as well as, once again, some other people in the Bitcoin community. And we met with these congressional staffers, these people, working on the Hill, Congress people, and every single one of them, every single meeting we had, at some point, they mentioned the phone calling campaign that Fight for the Future helped organize earlier this year around the crypto provision in the infrastructure bill, right? There were tens of thousands of phone calls that went to Congress people's offices. And let me tell you, they noticed. Okay, they took notice. And we had one office tell us that they even received like dozens of Bitcoin specific policy proposals that their team has individually reviewed, right? So the point is if Bitcoiners use their voice and they actually, once again, play this political game, start sending letters to their Congress people, call their Congress person's office, call their state and local Senate and representatives and the mayor, the governor, right? These are people that I know a lot of people tend to think that maybe there's like so many people are anti-Bitcoin. They're out to get the Bitcoin community. I think in reality, most people just don't know enough to have a formed opinion yet. And they don't know how much their constituents actually care. And so I would encourage you, if you are a Bitcoiner and you are in the United States, try to get involved in your local government in some way, shape, or form, or your national government, and just let your representatives know, hey, I believe in Bitcoin. Here's why. And here's what I think would be good for it, right? They want to hear those opinions, because the more that constituents start pressuring their politicians and letting them know this matters, the more politicians are going to start to actually care and come out and speak about this. And to that final point, and I apologize for going on here a little bit, to that final point of wanting politicians to come out and speak publicly, I think less than 50% of the Senate has come out and publicly made a Bitcoin or crypto statement at this point. Our team has actually been working on compiling that data. I think by last count is either 44 senators have come out and made some sort of Bitcoin or policy stance. That means we've still got over 50% of the United States Senate and well over 50% of the House, I won't even get into those numbers, who haven't even formed an opinion on this, or at least haven't publicly stated their opinion. So that means as constituents, we can do our job and let them know, hey, this is important to us. And you all know the numbers, right? Tens of millions of Americans own Bitcoin. Bitcoin Magazine, if you're listening to this podcast, I assume, you believe in Bitcoin more than the average person. You're the type of person that our politicians need to hear from, because you're the type of people that our politicians are supposed to be representing.
Definitely. I loved so much of that, actually. And it's fantastic to hear, first of all, how you're saying that our voices were heard when we were making calls to them and about the crypto provision in the infrastructure bill, because you did see often on Twitter or other social medias, doesn't matter if you call them, it doesn't work, doesn't do anything. And it is fantastic to hear from an inside source that, it actually does. They obviously got attention from that. And it's important, that Bitcoiners take up the helm of being politically active, doing things to put this into the mainstream political realm. Like you said, there's a lot of work left to be done in terms of forming the opinion of our representatives. And, it does seem that some of the people that would be best suited and best fit to represent Bitcoin are the least likely to be wanting to, interact with government on certain levels. So Bitcoin is that great juxtaposition of libertarianism and still needing to interact with very real power systems, as you started with. So certainly, but fantastic interest. Like it's great to hear the insider view, which is that they do hear us, and it is important.
Sure. And to that point, there's a general, I know that for a lot of people, are maybe not huge fans of um, maybe how well the United States government has represented them or their interests. And that's, once again, very valid. Depending on the state you live in, your vote might not feel like for the president, your vote might not feel like it matters, right? Same thing for the Senate for some people, or the House, right? National politics are actually really alienating sometimes because we're in a country of over 300 million people, and we have 500 plus, a little over 500 people in our Congress who are supposed to be representing all 300 plus million of those people. Voices are going to get lost in the thick of that. And that's why I do think local government and state regulations are also so important. So if we saw, I think it was like 40,000 phone calls to Congress around the crypto provision, if that made a difference, imagine what a fraction of that could do at a state or local level, right? So imagine if you start calling your mayor's office and you just get 2,000 phone calls to a mayor's office or a governor's office, right? That makes a huge difference. And I think we can get disillusioned sometimes with the political system thinking that our individual action doesn't matter, right? My one vote isn't going to decide who the president is, right? If I live in California and I vote red, or I live in, not Florida, Florida's swing state. If I lived in Texas in 2012 and I voted blue, right? Those votes might not feel like they matter, right? And individually, you might be correct that your one single vote did not change things. However, what we see is that if everybody thought that way, right, and you had thousands of people not voting, you had thousands of people not calling their politicians, right, or the converse, you have thousands of people who do vote, who do show up to vote, you have thousands of people who do make these phone calls, who do send these emails. That does make a difference. So I think collective action, kind of zooming out a little bit and viewing it as you're part of a whole. Yes, your one individual action might not be the thing that tips it over the edge, but you and your work in conjunction with thousands or even millions of other Bitcoiners, that will make a difference. And so I hope everybody realizes that together we can actually make a huge impact on Bitcoin in the US political system.
Seriously, Bitcoiners, we are capable of making a huge impact on the political system. And I guess to bounce off of that, how do you personally view or how do you envision the impact that Bitcoin will have on the political world?
Interesting. I think we're going to see a lot of politicians come out in the next, definitely by 2022. I think the majority of politicians on a national level are going to come out with a Bitcoin or crypto policy stance. I think we're already seeing in conversations that we've had with congressional candidates, left, right, center. I'm talking Democrats who are running for Senate in red states, and Republicans who are running for Senate or House in blue states. We've talked to a bunch of these candidates. A lot of them are adopting Bitcoin specific policy positions. I think people recognize, at least people who are hungry, people who are not complacent, right? A lot of incumbents don't feel the pressure to adopt a Bitcoin or crypto policy stance because strategically they don't see the incentive right now. I think once they start feeling the pressure, when every single one of their opponents has a Bitcoin specific policy stance, when the majority of the House and the Senate have a Bitcoin specific policy stance, and notice how I'm not even mentioning that it has to even be pro Bitcoin or pro crypto. Just the existence of those policy stances alone starts pushing the narrative in a direction that we want to see, right? Because right now we're still in this position where a lot of people think they can ignore Bitcoin. They think that if they just ignore it, it'll go away. Or if they don't like it, they can push the off button, right? And that, obviously it's not how Bitcoin works. So I think what we're seeing is politicians are going to feel pressure from their constituents from the bottom up, as American democracy should work, to make Bitcoin policy positions. And then how's that actually going to impact the political system? I think we're going to see a huge pro-innovation push for the US when we're talking about global competitiveness, when you're talking about something like a rising China and trying to combat a rising China. That's a bipartisan issue. that's something that the left and the right are both care about, that almost every American, right? Wherever you fall on the spectrum, you're going to be passionate about hopefully preserving, American power in some way, shape, or form. And so if you believe in that, I think there are a lot of politicians who are going to kind of ride this wave of crypto and Bitcoin equals innovation. It equals the new internet, right? It's this advanced technology that we can harness and use as a country to maintain global power. You don't have to love that perspective, but I do think that's a trend we're seeing in Washington. So from a national political perspective, I really think we're going to see this pro-innovation push that is ultimately going to be really, really good for Bitcoin. And I hope, and this is part of the work that we're doing, I really hope that the US government starts investing pretty heavily in Bitcoin companies, crypto companies, and kind of making this push to be a global leader rather than letting it slip through our fingers, which is unfortunately what it's looking like we're on the verge of moving toward now.
Yeah, I certainly hope that we grasp this opportunity as well. And it really will set the tone for the next few decades, centuries potentially of technological innovation and power structures, really. So, but I guess looking beyond the political world, I'd like to ask you what you're most looking forward to in the Bitcoin space, because there is like a lot of stuff going on right now.
Yeah, I don't know if I could just pick one thing. I'm so excited to see what this intersection of Bitcoin and gaming turns into. I know some just brilliant people who have given up their careers to go into Bitcoin and mobile gaming. Super excited to see what comes out of that. Yeah, I know I geeked out about this political stuff, but I'm really excited to see how Bitcoiners engage on a national level, how they engage on a state and local level, and really just use their voices. Because right now, Bitcoiners have a lot of energy. They have a lot of passion. Bitcoiners are very smart. They read more than probably like 90% of Americans, right? Like this is an educated, excited, passionate community that I love being a part of. I want to see that energy and excitement turn into real positive action, whether that's political or otherwise. And then just in general, I'm excited for this idea of, like, if you were involved in the internet in the 90s, you probably couldn't even foresee so many of the things that we have today, right? You couldn't foresee Amazon's 2-hour shipping, right? You couldn't foresee, necessarily how big Twitter or Facebook would become, or any of these kinds of things. I am excited for the possibility of the things that I don't know about what the future of Bitcoin could look like. That's something that actually, I wake up in the morning or I go to bed at night, and I'm excited by that notion of what I don't know, and what I don't know is on the horizon. And that's what really excites me about this space, realizing that there are people so much smarter than me that are working on things that I can't even begin to comprehend or fathom, and thinking that I'm going to be able to be involved in this space and be alive for the next generation of Bitcoiners. That's something that's hard to wrap my brain around. And I don't know, it makes me happy just thinking about it.
Well, that was an excellent answer to that question, and one of my favorite I've gotten yet. And I think you hit the nail on the head with how Bitcoin is. Even though it's big right now, it's simple. It's in its baby stages relative to the potential that this technology has. And there are problems that we have right now that will be solved by Bitcoin, and it just hasn't been done yet. But it's incredible to think, like you said, there's many smart people working on this industry that is in its youthful stages. And
really quick on that note, if you're listening to this podcast, you're into Bitcoin, you're interested in getting into the space, I'll say this, right? Because my background, I recently started working, in Bitcoin specifically. My background is in tech startups. It's in ed tech startups. I worked in marketing for a while, ran a marketing consulting firm, right? Like I was like legacy fiat system, but also bought into this idea that, hey, Silicon Valley could change the world, right? And maybe was led into a bit of a lie there. Long story short, what got me into Bitcoin, among many things, among ideology and passion for the industry in general, was seeing all of these brilliant people around me who, once again, were giving up their entire careers, their livelihoods, were moving across the country, across the world to go work in this industry. And that was a signal for me that, hey, I've got to wake up, because these people that I know, like, and respect and think are way smarter than me are moving toward this. That means that I'm missing something. So I would encourage you, if you're interested in the space, just look at the people around you, look at the people who are in the space, and ask yourself, are you interested in kind of following in the footsteps of people that you really respect? And if the answer is yes, I would love to see you in this space and love to talk to you.
Yeah. Follow the signal. That's absolutely good advice right there. Cause, I was introduced to this space by a very smart friend, and he was introduced to this space by a smart friend. And so it really does help when you know people and respect people and you see them, enter into this industry. It really is a signal that something great is going on here, and passionate people who, traditionally have wanted to change the world are shifting to focus on this technology, which appears to have the greatest potential to do so. But to end things on the lightest of notes, which I always like to do, I would like to ask you what your price prediction would be for both the end of this year and 2030.
Oh, man. This is going to be the lamest answer you've received, but it's the truth. I'm not smart enough to pretend that I understand on-chain analytics, and I'm not smart enough to pretend that I can outsmart Bitcoin. If I knew and had pretty good price predictions, right, I would be a lot richer than I am. So what I'll say is I'm holding. So whatever the price is at the end of 2021, to me, doesn't really matter, because I'm not cashing out at the end of 2021, right? 2030, I genuinely do believe in a, kind of that 10x bull run, getting to that $10 trillion market cap. I don't know exactly when, but that's kind of my bear case for what the future of Bitcoin looks like in the short to medium term, kind of as that digital gold reaching that market cap. So maybe not as bullish as some other people, but I also, if I gave you some of my bullish estimates, I don't know. I might be laughed off the air. So, yeah, with that, final thing. I don't know if I should, plug this. I don't want to do a shameless plug, but if anybody wants to get in touch and like talk about work we're doing, politically, or work we're doing at Bitcoin Mag. I mean, one of the things I love about Bitcoin and Bitcoin Twitter is like, everybody's so accessible. My DMs are open. Feel free to reach out. Love to get on the phone with you. If you heard anything in this podcast that you're interested in, want to chat about, shoot me a DM. My Twitter is Grant_McCarty. I don't know if I was supposed to do this, so I apologize. But I love interacting with the Bitcoin community. And once again, there are people who are so much smarter than me that I have yet to meet and that I want to meet, who I know I can learn a ton from.
No, absolutely. Plug necessary. I encourage other Bitcoiners to reach out to Grant, either politically or otherwise, because it's our job, right? We just discussed. It's our job to become politically active, and then maybe the bullish cases that you're envisioning, they can be true, and we can all be happy together as we soar past $10 trillion. But thank you for joining us, Grant. It's been an excellent show. For everyone, if you missed the beginning of the show, make sure to use code TACOPLEBS to get 10% off the conference ticket, and Macro21 to get a discount on the deep dive. And thank you again for joining me, Grant. It's been an excellent talk.
Thanks for having me, Casey. Appreciate it.
And make sure to be politically active, Bitcoiners, and check out the next episode of Meet the Plebs. And thanks for joining us.